Rash Behari Bose, the great Indian freedom fighter, escaped from India to Japan in 1915, fleeing British authorities in colonial India, who had launched a massive manhunt to capture Bose and put an end to his fight for independence. The Japan that he entered was no stranger to India, and in fact, by the time Bose arrived at the port of Kobe, there were thousands of Indians already living throughout the region. In what is widely known as the Sakoku period, from 1639 to 1854, Japan had restricted overseas contact, allowing only Dutch and Chinese ships to trade with Japan via the man-made island of Dejima at Nagasaki. During this period, Japan enjoyed relative peace and stability, but all this began to change in 1854 with the signing of the Japan-US Treaty of Peace and Amity, with which Japan became accessible to Western powers, marking the beginning of Japan's political turmoil. Traditionally, Japan had been run by the samurai class in a system of government known as the shogunate, or bakufu. However, this all came to an end in 1868 when it was replaced by the Meiji government, an emperor-centric political system that bore close parallels to the government structure of the British Empire. And it was with this that Japan's westernization began in full force. In 1859, the port of Yokohama was opened up to foreign trade, soon followed by the port of Kobe in 1868. From that time on, these cities were frequented by Indian-operated British ships arriving from Mumbai, then called Bombay, and Calcutta, as well as numerous others. Nippon Yusen, Japan's major steamship company, was founded in 1885, just 1 year before Rash Behari Bose was born, and it went on to establish regular routes between Japan and India, as well as Vancouver and Seattle, Dutch Indonesia, Australia, New Zealand, South America, and Cape Town, among others. Nippon Yusen was responsible for establishing the first ocean route connecting Kobe and Yokohama in Japan to Mumbai and Kolkata. Among the goods traded was cotton, which Japan purchased from India, as it was of excellent quality and fair price. As a result of this close and frequent trade with India, Yokohama and Kobe experienced a boom in Indian goods and cuisine, and it soon saw a rise in restaurants that served Indian curry. As all of this was unfolding, in 1903, the Japan-India Association, or Nichiin Kyokai, was founded by Okuma Shigenobu, Nagaoka Moriyoshi, and Shibusawa Eiichi, the purpose of which was to strengthen trade between India and Japan. At this time, Rash Behari Bose would have been around 17 years old, and he was already well involved in the struggle for Indian independence. It would be just 12 years until Bose would be forced to flee India forever, escaping to Japan, never to return again to his motherland. The first report of the Japan-India Association was published in 1909, describing the vibrant activities of Indian residents in Japan. In those days, India was still a colony of Britain, and so promoting trade between the two Asian regions served the Japan-India Association's main objective of strengthening the ties between Japan and Britain. This highlights an often overlooked history of Japan and the Western world, which is that in the early 1900s, prior to the outbreak of the Second World War, Japan was the only independent, self-governing Asian nation that was participating in the international arena, and Japan and Britain were tied together in an allyship under the Anglo-Japanese alliance signed in January of 1902. Britain has supported Japan in espionage, ship design, finance, and diplomacy during the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905, and Japanese soldiers fought and died alongside the British in World War I. In fact, some Japanese warships that were used in Japan's victory in the Russo-Japanese War were ordered by the Imperial Japanese Navy from American and British shipbuilders, with some also going on to contribute to the Allied war effort in World War I, in Japan's support of Britain under the Anglo-Japanese alliance. In 1910, the Japan-British exhibition was held in London, welcoming 8 million visitors. It sought to promote knowledge of Japan's modernization and the notion of an alliance of peoples between Britain and Japan, promoting the two nations as symmetrical island empires in East and West. When Rash Behari Bose arrived in Japan in 1915 aboard the Nippon Yusen Sanukimaru, he was greeted at the port of Kobe by the familiar sight of European architecture, not unlike that which he would have seen when he deported the Kolkata port in India. At this time, he also would not have been an unusual sight, as there were already thousands of Indians living in Kobe, Yokohama, and the surrounding areas. 13 years later, A.M. Nair would arrive in Kobe in March 1928. At the time, he was still a young man, being 19 years younger than Rash Behari Bose, and he entered Kyoto University to study civil engineering. Japan had long been flourishing in Sanskrit language studies and Indian philosophy, and as Kyoto University was the mecca of Indic studies, Nair was warmly welcomed by a famous Japanese Sanskrit scholar and Indologist who volunteered to give him private tutoring in the Japanese language. During his time at Kyoto University, Nair lived at the home of Professor Taguchi and his wife. In his memoirs, Nair wrote, "The Taguchis would go out of their way to attempt cooking for me in the Indian style. Although the typical Japanese meal does not use much of spice, the Japanese people do enjoy curries with authentic Indian spices. Whenever we wanted a change, there was no difficulty, because Indian-style curry and rice had become popular in several city hotels and restaurants in Japan from the 1920s, together with certain typical Western food items like cornflakes and tomato ketchup. In fact, curry rice had become part of Japanese vocabulary as kare rice." Soon after Nair arrived in Japan, he made a visit to Rash Behari Bose in Tokyo. By this time, Bose had already been in Japan for over a decade, and he was famous for his Indian independence activities. This would be the beginning of Bose and Nair's close working relationship and their joint effort on the Indian Independence League and the Indian National Army, which would continue until Bose's passing in Tokyo in January of 1945.